Ben Janke. I work at the St. Anthony Falls lab at the University of Minnesota.
Jacques Finlay, professor in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior in the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota.
We are studying aquatic vegetation dynamics because we want to find out how dominant plant types influence stormwater pond biogeochemistry in order to understand management options and design options so that stormwater practitioners and professionals might be able to manage ponds more effectively, more efficiently for water quality, especially in regards to phosphorus.
Wonderful, thanks and good morning. Great to be with you this morning. Feels like start of classes in September, nice and cool. I wanted to start out before we get to talking about the Bell Pond, which is endlessly fascinating. I wanted to just give a little bit of context for what Ben and I are going to do, at least in our part of speaking. We're going to talk about some specific projects in more detail, but we're also going to refer to other projects that are ongoing, funded by MSRC and other entities. On behalf of our collaborators who can't be here, Dr. John Gulliver, Purnima Natarajan, Bill Herb, and some other folks. So we will allude to a broad set of collaborations and studies. Typically, when we study a pond for one project, we're sharing information as much as possible across different projects. So we're trying to leverage as much as possible the investments that have been made in taking the time and effort to study any one pond in particular. So as a starting point overview, we are looking at a suite of ponds. So we'll visit 3 today, but we have a set of 20 to 30 that we've studied intensively, so we can compare across sites and look at factors that control mixing, wind, oxygen in a comparative analysis. We have a little bit of research ongoing where we can compare through time and look at temporal changes, as we'll talk about here. And we have some unique opportunities to actually look at management experiments with partners like the City of Bloomington. Jacques is here, one of our collaborators in the ongoing vegetation project. So we have opportunities to actually look at interventions and many of the different things that are being studied in terms of addressing issues related to phosphorus and other problems associated with stormwater ponds. So we're here at the Bell Pond today. How many of you are comfortable calling this a pond? Raise your hand. And then how many of you maybe have some issues with calling this a pond? Maybe. We'll talk a lot about whether it's a pond or something else. But 5 years ago, I think maybe there would be less of an argument, right? This was a pond, open water habitat, and just after construction in 2017, 2018, it looked like a pond, beautiful, open. And what you can see here today is some of what's happened in the intervening time. So we started working on this site really as a way to connect with, get a foothold on the Bell Museum property and connect with the Bell in terms of translating information about stormwater ponds and ponds in general with the folks that visit the Bell Pond. So that was all great, some haphazard data collection, observations, but it didn't take long to see some really interesting things happening in this site over time. So just by coming back, making observations in the first 2 years, which I wish we had collected more data back then, but since that time we've sort of got on board and really embraced this site as one that we could learn from as a characteristic small end member site. So why is this site so interesting? And maybe none of you are too surprised to see a small shallow pond like this sort of end up as something that's not an open water habitat. However, I guarantee you that the folks who envisioned this pond did not envision the pond looking quite this way. And so they are battling with this emergent vegetation here in terms of trying to control it, because it sort of limits some of the uses that they want to get out of this pond. What we saw through time in this pond is clear water in 2018, tremendous filamentous algal blooms in 2019, 2020, and right about 2020, 2021, our floating vegetation started to show up. So floating vegetation includes free-floating vegetation, duckweed, and watermeal. And as you probably are very familiar with, that is a major indicator and driver of low oxygen and phosphorus release in our stormwater ponds. So as a site to sort of study this rapid change to floating plants, we started to work on it in 2021 and have gradually ramped up our intensity of observations, working with the Bell Museum folks to get near daily observations of floating plant cover. A couple of years ago, when we had some dry weather, things changed again, and the pond changed from one that was completely covered with floating vegetation to something like what you see here, although closer to 100% cover of emergent vegetation. Last fall, the Bell had enough, and they did a cattail removal. We were able to collect data to examine that last fall. And the hope was that by controlling the emergent vegetation, we would see improved oxygen conditions and maybe lower phosphorus concentrations. The other thing that happened in this little pond over time is that phosphorus concentrations in the water column steadily rose from sort of modest levels, 60 to 70 micrograms per liter in the water column, to 150, 160, up beyond 200 micrograms per liter in the last couple of years. So we've seen rapid changes in release of sedimentary phosphorus from the sediments in this pond, which was pretty surprising to us and something that we're interested in understanding more. So the focus of the vegetation projects are to understand the dynamics of vegetation change in terms of a new project that we're just beginning, and to understand the management options of controlling different vegetation types which we know are harmful or are indications of poor functionality of stormwater ponds. So we're using ponds like this, intensive measurements. Ben's going to talk about some of the intensive data collection that's ongoing here to study dynamics through a seasonal cycle, and then when we have opportunities to look at slightly longer term change or management experiments like the ones that we've been doing in Bloomington to manipulate floating plant cover, we're taking advantage of those to learn about what is necessary to push vegetation communities in ponds from one state into a state involving submerged macrophytes that generally are associated with improved water quality performance in these ponds. So I'm standing in the way a little bit, but if you look out into this pond, you can see emergent vegetation. You can see duckweed, a free-floating plant, which has covers at times 100% of the surface. But you're just below the surface, you may be able to see a submerged macrophyte. And I forgot to mention around 2019, 2020, that submerged macrophyte flourished and was dominant in this pond. Then when the free-floating plants became established, it pretty much disappeared. And since the cattail removal last fall, it has made a dramatic comeback. So we're right from this little experiment, which we didn't really have planned in our work plan, we're able to see a lot of the dynamics around vegetation and some really rapid transitions from different conditions over time.
I'm trying to think, I made a few notes. One thing that is interesting about this pond in terms of the phosphorus accumulation is the drainage area for this pond is basically the roof of this building. So the phosphorus is all coming from here, mostly in the pond, because the runoff is not really contributing much. So it's kind of an interesting point to make there. And as Jacques said, we have across the other sites that we study, we have kind of a broad range of size and vegetation cover in the ponds and around the ponds. So certainly around this pond, there's not a lot of tree cover. There's a big building here, but a lot of the older ponds in some of these, especially in more of the urban core of the Twin Cities, they're older, they're smaller, the trees are probably 30, 40 years old, and so there's not a lot of wind access to the ponds. So we knew that we needed data that could tell us something about the wind speed that we could observe on a pond. There is actually a station out here. I'm glad I brought a prop because you can't see it because of the cattails. Did I accidentally turn this thing?
No, you're good.
It's
If
still
you
good.
come out on this rock, you can see it.
Or do you say you need help?
We've probably fallen. So we have anemometers out on some of these ponds. That's to measure wind speed, and we can compare that to either an airport or something that's measured nearby to get an idea of how much wind sheltering occurs. And for most of these ponds, it's pretty substantial. Maybe around, some of them are 90% or more sheltering or wind speed reduction. So the magnet on it. The other thing we do is measure water level in the pond. So we have some idea of what's happening when storm events occur. And then we have thermistors that are mounted on a post, basically give us a profile every 10-15 minutes, something like that. So that tells us a lot about whether the pond is stratified and how much it's mixing, because kind of at the core of all of this, as Jacques alluded to, kind of in earlier studies, we realized oxygen is really important. It tends to drive, low oxygen tends to drive that sediment phosphorus release, but we found very strong relationships between the phosphorus concentrations in the pond and oxygen. So the lower the oxygen, the higher the phosphorus. So we wanted to know how often are the ponds mixing. When we first started collecting data, it was just we'd come out once every couple of weeks, take a profile in the middle of the day. Of course, when the pond is most stratified, we said, hey, these ponds are stratified all the time, low oxygen. But once we put these sensors in, we realized they actually do mix a little bit. They just don't mix all the way to the bottom. Even this pond mixes a small amount, although less so when the cattail cover looks like this. So that's kind of the information that we're trying to get from these stations. And then once they can talk a little bit more about this at the last site, which contrasts a lot with this as a bigger, more open site. But that mixing frequency and how deep the pond mixes actually has, as you'd expect, a very strong influence on the oxygen. So there's the best way to reintroduce oxygen is either from the atmosphere or to have macrophytes growing in the bottom of the pond. So we've set up these stations, I think probably in 25 ponds over several studies. So we have a pretty good data set now, and a lot of the data that we've collected from that kind of distilled actually went into an assessment, a pond assessment tool that I'll talk about at the next stop. I think that's pretty much it. Take questions?
I'm gonna ask questions.
There's one question in the crowd.
But before we get to Emily's question,
Sure.
we've always tried to emphasize that the research we're doing is not about the University of Minnesota and only occurs here. It involves a lot of local partners. And so some of the vegetation work, I'm going to get to a question here, but I want to emphasize that this research is being done in communities. For example, with Jacques, one of the ponds or multiple ponds that part of the study are down in the city of Bloomington. could you guys touch on the 2023 study that's going to end this coming December? By the way, there's a fact sheet in your packet about this. But what you've been studying in terms of vegetation removal, I think with the floating one, just 2 minutes, a little bit about what you're doing there, and a teaser for what you're discovering.
Great. We have been working with Jacques at the City of Bloomington in terms of looking for ways to address the overabundance of free-floating plants, duckweed, watermeal especially. So we know that a lot of our ponds are low oxygen, and a good part of the reason for that is the presence of free-floating plants. What can we do about this overall prevalence? We can think about design changes to try to avoid them, but we have thousands of ponds that are presently influenced by excessive floating plant abundance. So working with Jacques and the City of Bloomington, we have looked at some different ways of manipulating, mechanically removing floating plant cover and seeing what benefit we got from that. And as it turns out, and Jacques, I would love to hear more from you about your experience, but turns out that it is difficult but not impossible to do. I think it's a step in a process of figuring out how we might address the problem with one set of tools. And the responses that we saw were encouraging in terms of, if you remove free-floating plants, you can get a response of the submerged macrophyte community as increased growth rates. So we know that we're connecting the dots in terms of the dynamics. Duckweed is suppressing the growth of macrophytes, and when we have too much duckweed, it is going to kill off and suppress the submerged vegetation community. So that's an important piece of information. Light is important. There's a lot of competition going on here, and these free-floating plants, where they're abundant, can really dominate the light resources in ponds. Other ways of addressing the problem include herbicide, which we haven't done a lot of work on, but there may be some issues with using herbicide to control free-floating plants. Reducing phosphorus concentrations. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the different ways that we can reduce the internal phosphorus release. And if we can drive it down to a threshold below which duckweed can't grow rapidly, then we have a potential way to limit free-floating plants. Because we know some older ponds do okay in terms of having healthy submerged macrophyte communities and low duckweed abundance. So we'll talk about this a little bit later in terms of some of the other management approaches, but I don't know, Jacques, if you want to add something.
No, we can. I think you covered it, unless people want details about how the removals happen. But
so maybe we'll get to Emily's question.
Yeah, just for this pond, can you talk more about how the phosphorus levels got so high in the first place, given if the roof is the main source?
Yeah, great question.
Maybe repeat the question.
Question is, how did the phosphorus levels get so high in this pond, given that it is a new pond getting runoff from a roof, so having lower input phosphorus concentration? So great question, and the short answer is that we don't completely know. Something about shallow ponds is conducive to rapid recycling of phosphorus in ways that we don't completely understand. We know that these ponds tend to have low oxygen overall. Even though they're very shallow, they seem to be ones that just don't do very well in terms of overall oxygenation, due to wind sheltering and a lot of contact with the terrestrial environment and a relatively small water column that can absorb oxygen. during cool periods. So those are some ideas, but we know that we're getting the picture that if you build a pond like this, you're going to have phosphorus problems in the water column. That seems to be an emerging result.
What are the underlying soils?
Another great question. These are soils that were not hydric. That's about all I know. This was a site of a schoolhouse associated with the Gibbs property. So there may be some, it has a long history of human occupation here at this site. The site was completely excavated, so it's probably not that we're sort of sitting in a especially phosphorus-rich location, but this is an upland constructed pond, one that we would expect should not be predisposed to having a lot of phosphorus ready to go. But nonetheless, we're seeing rapid increases.
It also has a clay liner.
Oh.
So go figure.
Follow them, Ross.
Yeah, well, excuse me if my ecology terms are not quite correct, but I mean, is it fair to say that when you build a pond like this with the kind of size, depth profile, that it is ripe for colonization by some types of plants, and we're just gonna start importing life and phosphorus to it? Because I mean, it is habitat, maybe not the habitat they were hoping to have, but I mean, I don't know. I hear birds, I see insects. Not that that's necessarily a benefit, but I mean, colonizing vegetation finds certain opportunities. So maybe we've just provided an opportunity in this kind of design criteria that were used or something, without knowing, of course.
Yeah, I think if I understand the question is, I think there are some functions that are happening here that are probably there's habitat. Cattails are in some ways sort of performing some water quality functions. So denitrification is probably stimulated. Evaporation of water, but we know an overabundance of cattails, which if you saw this pond last year, I think it was about 100% covered. So what you're looking at this year is the result of a complete cattail removal last fall, and this abundance of cattails has increased from 0 to what you see over the growing season. Just amazingly rapid increase. They tried to elevate the water level to kill them off, but that was not effective.
Ross.
What is the design depth and what is the outlet?
Yeah, the design depth was quite shallow, around 4 feet approximately. The outflow is a berm just on the other side here, which drains to the stormwater system on Cleveland Avenue. So, in terms of impacts of this pond in downstream export, it's probably near 0 unless we get some huge rainstorms. Most of the time, any overflow is going to go and infiltrate in the next basin down here. So this has really been a pond that's been interesting for us to understand the dynamics. But the issues related to phosphorus export are probably low just because there's so much infiltration downstream.
Bridget?
I'm gonna piggyback off the design depth. So is there a safety bench, like the 10-to-1 safety bench? Is it what are the side slopes? Is it fairly steep or is it fairly shallow as far as side slopes go? Sorry, engineer.
I don't actually know. Yeah, I know it wasn't designed to be shallow. I'm trying to remember. I've seen the plan drawings and I can't remember what the slopes were, but it seemed pretty normal. But now that I look at it, it's either filled in or there's a lot growing in it. The deeper part of the pond is actually down here. They had originally thought of this as being they wanted to use it for irrigation, reuse. I don't know what happened to that plan. But so you would need a pond of a certain depth, I think, and stable shoreline to do that. Otherwise, it's just going to get shallow and fill in. But for some reason, that part of the project didn't pan out. That's all I can say to that.
Other questions? Yeah, Keith.
We link water quality to adverse impacts, right? So that's why we study water quality. But I just want to piggyback on this other concept that was about ecology of it. Like, yeah, phosphorus is high, but we're probably creating some major habitat for a lot of insects and life and the birds and stuff. So that was the ultimate goal of water quality, having good water quality so we support wildlife, right, and wildlife. So we're doing that despite the our focus on phosphorus. The point is, can you ever study like these different ponds we're going to see, like what is the relative product abundance and what are they supporting in terms of how interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. As you saw, the bell uses it as a educational tool. You just come down here and you can scoop up bugs. And I saw some tadpoles in here. There's muskrats living out here, which is also bane of my existence for these stations. But yeah, and especially since the design of this pond doesn't really promote a lot of phosphorus export, we might as well enjoy the ecology of it, right? That is an important consideration. I don't know.
I would want to add, and maybe anyone, Ross or anybody from the Pond Research Committee, the Bell probably had other objectives for putting this pond here. But in a design and constructed stormwater pond and upland for stormwater, vegetation and beauty and bees is not any in the design objectives. A design and constructed stormwater pond is for rate control, volume control, particulate pee removal, and sediment. And so the question we have to start asking ourselves is, as this vegetation grows, does it influence those original design criteria and specifications? And if not, and what other benefits is it providing?
Yeah, I think these ponds are fascinating biological systems, and there is a lot of different organisms show up super fast. Like right away, there are animals, frogs, muskrats sort of colonizing these habitats. We would love to study that, but the focus has been on phosphorus primarily in a lot of the work that we've been doing. And this pond is designed, I think, a little bit differently. So there's a safety component, there's an accessibility component that's embedded in this site. Last thing I'll say, when we do get 100% floating plant cover, we shut off almost all of the oxygen, and under those conditions, things are pretty bad for any aquatic animals. So, right now we've got a great mix of habitats. Things are pretty good. A couple of years ago, this pond looked like a complete carpet of duckweed and watermeal. So, super dynamic.
Other questions before we leave this site? Yeah, Nancy.
I'm just curious, you said all the water's coming from the roof. Has the water from the roof ever been tested for phosphorus or other nutrients?
We've thought about it, haven't quite got around to it. City of Minneapolis had a study a few years ago where they measured roof runoff from 3 roofs. If anyone knows more about that, I think those phosphorus concentrations were low. There is phosphorus moving in the atmosphere, so it wasn't zero, but compared to a neighborhood street runoff, substantially lower phosphorus concentrations coming off of the roof. Probably some other things moving through that as well that would be interesting to know about, but yeah, great question.
All right, hopefully this will get your minds working. We'll have time for a lot more questions as we go through the next 2 sites.